So I'm going to transition into tannins. Well, I've taught you everything there is to know about tannins in the vineyard and the winery, and now we're going to look at these tannins here. So these tannins were developed based on the research that I've done in the tannin world. And why would we add them? Really thinking about it. And going back to how we improve and perceive wines, color, aroma, flavor, taste, body, and texture. As I said this earlier, tannins can affect every aspect of perception, okay? It's not just the body and texture, it can be taste, aroma, flavor, and color. So there are different types of tannins, fermentation tannins. We tend to break them down into two categories, tannins that you would add at crush versus tannins that you would add in the cellar and then finishing. All of our tannins are grape-based tannins, 100% grape. And so fermentation tannins would be added at crush. The idea in this case is it takes some time before the tannins in the grape berry start to become extracted. Yet in that window of time between when you crush and when you start to extract the tannins that came with the grape, there are things that you can do with that must. And one of the things that is really critically important is dealing with damaged fruit. And if you've got any condition where you've got any kind of rot present in your fruit, if there's been a rain event that could potentially increase bunch rot presence, you need to be adding tannins during that period of time. It inactivates lactases, polyphenol oxidases, pathogenesis-related proteins, and so it's best to add a tannin that is not of the berry. We kind of philosophically would like to preserve those tannins for the wine itself, and so these tend to be added at that time. And so if you don't have damaged fruit, oftentimes these tannins can be beneficial anyway because the color extraction curve precedes the tannin extraction curve. And the sooner you can start to fix that tannin or that color, the better. And so oftentimes adding tannin at this time already starts to work on your color stability. And then protein binding. StellarTans, on the other hand, tend to be thought of as building structure. We tend to think, all right, I made my wine, I extracted it, I pressed it, and damn it, I pressed it too early. Or darn it, there's some bitterness in here. And you need to optimize the structure of the wine. And that's where a cellar tannin can be important. Finishing tannin tends to be thought, it's more of a timing issue, same tannins that we sell, but the questions tend to be different. It's more around aromatics, that you want to tweak your aromatics before you go into the bottle. Hopefully by this time you've built your structure. Structure should be built as early as possible in a wine's life. And then the final point just before your touch-up, before you bottle, is getting those tannins in there to optimize aromatics. Maybe tweak the structure a little bit. You want to do this stage as early as possible as well. So hopefully, the month before bottling, you're no longer adding macromolecules into your system. Anytime you add a larger molecule into a system, you create a potential for physical instability. And so you want to be able to get that all sorted out as soon as possible. So if you can get those tannins added prior to that, that's the best opportunity to confirm that I've got a stable system still, it's still good, and it's ready for bottling. As I mentioned earlier, the tannins that we sell are very much based on this concept of activity, where we change the size profile and we change the pigment incorporation in that tannin to try to affect this activity of the tannin as a result. And so when you do these wines, it's really important to do trials. And it's just because you got one tannin that works 1 year under one condition doesn't mean that same tannin is going to work in a different wine system. So always, whenever you're doing tannin trials, play with them. It's a great thing to do. It's very formative and instructive in terms of learning about how the tannins react with matrices. When to add, and I talked about that. These are the tannins realm. I think that probably is it. I think, loads. TTB limit on tannin adds 150 milligrams per liter as phenolic. So all of our tannins, that's the way they're designed to work in that range, 150 milligrams per liter. The tannins that our product line, very high phenolic values. If you compare us with some of the competitors, our phenolic numbers are pretty high. And so it's something to think about. We don't cost it based on weight, we cost it based on phenolic value, and so you'll see that difference. We're really about selling activity as opposed to just a bunch of powder. I think that's it. Any questions? Ready to taste some wine? Yeah. All right, Ralph. You guys, they're all yours.
All right, so my name is Ralph Yako. I'm an R&D scientist out of the Fresno facility, working for Gusmer. I came in yesterday. I've treated some wines just so we can translate some of what you've seen in the presentation as a demonstration in terms of sensory analysis. What we have here, I've selected 3 wines, 1 white and 2 reds, and what I had in mind is a certain property of each that I wanted to change by adding one of those tannins. So like Dr. Kennedy said, these tannins have different compositions in terms of their size. So starting with the white one I picked was high alcohol. It was a little bit hard for me to find high alcohol white that has very low residual sugar, so it has a little bit of sugar. But my main goal was to treat it so I can mask some of that high alcohol, basically improve the structure of the wine. So what you have here is you have a control and you have treated. Okay. And for those, I've used the highest possible dosage that I could, just because it's a finished wine. It was about 48 hours of treatment time. You know, these are finished wine. I did not want the wines to oxidize and then we miss the purpose of this tasting. With the red, the same thing. I've chosen a couple. One of them, I've chosen StellarTan R right here, and my goal was to actually improve volume and mid-palate, and for me that was missing in that wine. And then the other red one, I've chosen StellarTan HP, and my main concern was the astringency and bitterness of that wine. So my goal was to go to a more velvety, more smooth wine for the treated compared to the control. For those, which one did you say? What was that? StellarTan G. So you can see here there's a few categories. The fermentation tannin that Dr. Kennedy talked about, you would use it as at a different stage. But what I use is I use finishing wines. For the white, StellarTan G, and then for the red, R and HP. And for both of the red as well, I've used 150 milligrams per liter as well, the highest, so I can make that difference that I'm trying to demonstrate for you guys. So taste through the wine. I have a scoring sheet here for you to keep just so you can remember how these tannins affected the mouthfeel attributes that you have on the right side, on the right hand side, this column that has astringency or dryness, how dry the wine is, bitterness, the body of the wine, and the fruity notes and complexity. I noticed when I added the tannins to the whites, it didn't only just mask the alcohol, the high alcohol, but it also brought up some of this fruity notes. So taste for yourself and see the impact of those tannins on the wines. Thank you. By the way, I wanted to mention that these tannins, I was happy with the way they went into solution when I added them to the wine. They went into solution almost immediately without having to rehydrate them first, like some of the other competitors that you have to do that, or previous products that we've had at Gusmer. So that was a plus. Exactly. So these products are made to treat wines that, you know, they need some work. You know, that, let's say you've made a wine and you need to adjust it at the end. That's when these products are used. I had to use it in a finished wine. It's already probably been treated. That's why I went to a high limit, just to kind of show you guys that you can actually play with the wine by adding those. But if you have an end goal in mind, if you look at the pamphlet for the StellarTan, they go by different proportions of different sizes. So let's say if you have a bitter wine and bitter wine is associated with smaller tannins, you would go, for example, if I'm making a wine, I would go with StellarTan HP. You would notice that in terms of monomers, oligomers, the concentrations are lower than the polymer, and that's what I try to do with the HP that I treated. I thought if I were to add the StellarTan HP to a bitter wine, it would take it from being bitter maybe to a little bit more astringent, or that sweet spot that I want the wine to be in.
My other question is, if you treated these yesterday, do you see a continued evolution over some period of time, or is what I see today what I'll see 30 days from now?
I'm assuming that if you were to do in the wine, with the wine having all of those solids in it, you would see that evolution. For me, if I were to leave it for about a week, the wine is oxidized. It's hard for me to pick it up. But from, let's say, 24 to 48 hours, yes, I do see more of what I want to see. Let's say if I set a goal in mind to reduce bitterness, if I treat for 24 hours and I gas the bottle and I lock them, keep them for the next day, I taste, and I've done that actually in the lab before I come here, and then I do it for 48 hours, I would notice that the goal I set in mind is I'm achieving that goal a lot more, spending a couple of days of treatment time versus 1 day, 24 hours.
How about a longer range forecast, even like we have a 2-year barrel aging program?
Mhm.
If I bench this out and knowing that this is a very dynamic situation with the tannins, they disconnect, they reassemble,
Yes.
they're acid catalyzed, obviously
oxidized,
in the acidic
yes.
environment. How will I be able to predict if I put something in at the, say, end of MLF or a blending, how this will be, how my wine will be impacted by what I, treated with by the end of barrel aging? Have you done any research into that?
The thing is, it's, the way I would, if I want to tackle a problem with wine, I would see, based on the wine right now, what do I need to fix in that wine? And with the addition, like Dr. Kennedy said, let's say you want to do this maybe a month ahead of time. If you were to keep consistently sampling that wine to see how it's developing until you decide you want a bottle. And that's how I would do it.
So
If
it's
you
really
want to,
more of a shorter term treatment rather than
yes.
a long term kind of.
Yes. I mean, you can always, I'm a chemist, so in order to understand my wine, I would go and analyze it. I would want to know what kind of tannins are in my wine, what are the proportions of skins to seeds, and maybe then I would get a better idea of what I want to use. But if you don't have that handy,
Right.
you would want to do your own trial using different samples of those and see which one works best for you.